For many centuries, ordinary adventurers conquered mazes that were filled with monsters and were very dangerous. Despite this, many adventurers tried to get to the lowest floors of the dungeon. It turns out, according to an ancient legend, on the top floor, after killing the main and most powerful monster, a mysterious portal opens that will move a person to another world. One of these seekers was the main character named Lekan. Together with his friend, whose name is Bud, the man got to the very last floor and together they were able to defeat the boss. At this moment, a black hole forms in the middle of the room. The Lekan, without hesitation, entered the portal and Bud followed him. The main character found himself in a parallel world, but unfortunately, Bud was not there. The Lekan decides to use magic power, which is able to detect a magical creature or a person who is able to use magic within a radius of 300 meters. The man plans to find his friend to continue the journey together. Suddenly, the main character discovers a couple of people with the help of a spell. The adventurer hears the girls scream and decides to immediately follow them. Lekan discovers an expensive carriage with horses and several warriors who protect the transport from magical boars. The main character decides to help the victims and kills all the opponents. One of the knights tries to thank the savior, but the Lekan does not understand them because he does not know the language in which they communicate. At this moment, a young girl named Luvi gets out of the carriage and thanks her savior with gestures. It turns out that the girl is the daughter of a very influential feudal lord. Suddenly, Luvi takes the main character by the hand and makes it clear that he invites him to his residence. A feudal lord named Cynical meets a guest in his domain. An elderly man decides to give his daughter's savior a small hut in the garden. After 2 years, the Lekan settles into a new world and learns the language. Unfortunately, the main character could not find his friend and find the maze, which he had not visited for a long time. Suddenly, the adventurer is called by Luvi and informs that she plans to go for a walk to the nearest cliff to enjoy the beauty of her own lands. A young girl asks a man to accompany her to protect herself from the attack of evil and bloodthirsty monsters. Lekan obeys the will of the princess and sets off with Luvi on the road. On the way to the cliff, the main character thinks that it's time for him to leave the Sinakila estate and go to the nearest maze. At this moment, the Lekan feels that a large monster is approaching them. The man decides to attack first and runs to attack. Without difficulty, the adventurer manages to win. A few days later, Luvi celebrates his birthday. The girl turns 14 years old. In this world, it is believed that a person who has reached this age becomes a full-fledged adult. During the celebration, the main character is hailed by one of the knights and asks to talk in private. It turns out that Levi will soon get married, and that's why Lekan will have to refrain from close contact with the princess. Lekan decided to visit the nearest forest, because he had previously felt a large and strong monster. As a result, the main character finds a large porcupine that has several limbs and 2 eyes. Fortunately, the great monster was asleep and the adventurer had a chance to attack first and strike. After analyzing the situation, the man attacks the monster and eventually kills him. At that moment, Lekan realized that it was time to leave the Cynical residence and start his own new adventure in a new world. After some time, the Lekan enters the village. The main character decides to go to a local tavern to eat and stock up on provisions. At this moment, an old man named Ivan approaches the man. Suddenly, for an adventurer, an elderly man offers him a job. Lekan will have to escort a wealthy merchant named Cheney to a city called Vokar. It is in this thriving city that the labyrinth is located. The main character is surprised by such a coincidence and without hesitation agrees to the job offered. When meeting a merchant, an adventurer meets a young girl named Ida. The adventurer claims that she is an adventurer of high rank, so her services are very expensive. After a short conversation, the Lekan offers to distribute responsibilities. Ida starts ordering and insulting the main character. The girl claims that the Lekan is obliged to obey her because her rank is much higher than that of a man. After some time, the whole squad sets off to the city of Vokar. Along the way, Ida lags behind the group due to fatigue, but despite this, the Lekan continues along with the merchant. In the evening of the same day, the detachment decides to make a halt. Cheney asks the main character to find Ed because he is worried about a nice girl. With the help of his magical abilities, the main character easily finds the girl and drags her to the camp. When the adventurer regains consciousness, she begins to justify herself, but the main character immediately realizes that she is not a high-ranking adventurer. The next morning, Lekan discovers that the lanterns that the merchant placed around the camp were supposed to scare away evil magical monsters and spirits, but instead used magical creatures. It turns out that they were surrounded from different sides by more than 200 monsters. When Ida finds out about the bad news, the girl goes into shock and begins to panic. In the end, the Lekan alone deals with all the monsters, and soon the squad manages to continue on its way. When the squad is a few kilometers away from the city, the group decides to stop to wash in the river. At this moment, Ifan uses a spell with which the main character and Ida fall and lose consciousness. It turns out that the old man turned out to be a dangerous criminal. Ifan planned to rob Cheney to make a lot of money. An elderly man reveals his true identity and threatens the merchant with a mechanism that looks like a firearm. At this moment, the main character uses a spell with which he neutralizes the villain and saves his employer. A few days later, Lekan wakes up in a hotel room in the city of Valker. The day has come when Cheney will pay for the work of the adventurers. The main character goes down to the tavern, where Ida is already waiting for him. A few minutes later, Cheney also arrives and pays off the adventurers. The man acted fairly and paid the young girl much less than the Lekan. Also, it turned out that the merchant had declassified Ed. The girl had a fake adventurer's badge. In fact, the girl was still not registered with the guild and was engaged in fraud. After moralizing, the girl asks for forgiveness and walks away in shame. Lekan wants to learn how to create healing potions to use while traveling in the maze. Cheney advises a very famous doctor named Sheila and gives the address. The main character finds the doctor's house and with the help of his ability realizes that the woman has a very powerful magical power. Lekan tells an elderly woman about himself and she claims that a man must pass her exam in order to become a true disciple of the great doctor. Sheila orders the main character to go to the guild and complete several tasks that she will tell him about. After completing all the necessary tasks, Sheila decides to accept Lekan as an apprentice. During the next school day, Ida knocks on Sheila's hut. It turns out that the girl really wants to learn how to use magic to become even stronger. Sheila invites a young adventurer to come into the house and drink tea. The Lekan tries to drive away the intrusive girl, but the old lady does not allow this to be done. The doctor falls into thought and comes up with a brilliant idea. An elderly woman offers Lekan to personally teach Ed to use magic. Sheila claims that this will help a man improve his own skills and teach a beginner how to use magic. The main character cannot refuse his teacher and eventually agrees. Lekan is trying to teach a young adventurer to use the simplest spell. But unfortunately, Ida does not manage to do this. Suddenly, the main character decides to take a few days off and go to the maze to test his abilities. Sheila is worried about her outstanding student. The old lady hands Lekan a handful of pills that are able to restore mana to help him during the adventure. In the maze, Lekan quickly penetrates the low floors, which are inhabited by the most dangerous monsters. With the help of the studied spells that Sheila taught, the man easily gets to the very last floor, where the main monster of the entire dungeon is waiting for him. The boss of the last level of the maze turns out to be very strong. His armor surpasses anything he has seen before. The monster has highly developed instincts and intelligence. The battle was very difficult and merciless. In the end, the main character manages to kill the bloodthirsty monster and take the golden stone. Upon arrival in Valker, Lekan meets with Cheney and tells about his adventures in the maze. The merchant is very surprised that the main character, alone, managed to get to the last floor and eliminate the main monster of the dungeon. Also, Cheney talks about the golden stone. It turns out that this artifact is able to significantly increase the characteristics of the owner, and the merchant also notices that the stone costs a lot of money. In the evening of the same day, Lekan again conducts training with Ed. A man gives wise instructions and tactics on how to use magical powers. As a result, after some time, the young girl manages to use a simple spell, which finally worked. A few months later, Ed manages to improve his own magical skills and improve his rating among adventurers. Sheila decided to join the battle group, which consisted of the main character and a young girl, and together they went on another dangerous mission. Subscribe to the channel. Love you.